se ne zgodi pogosto, vsaj ne v naši ustanovi, da gostimo tako pomembnega gosta, kot je profesor Alessandro Portelli, čigar knjigo smo po mnogih letih dela in premišljevanj uspeli prevesti. Torej, jaz bom začel, in tako so se tudi s profesorjem Portellijem dogovorila v slovenščini, in prehajam v angleščino za trenutek, da se zahvalim tudi njegovi ekscelenci italijanskemu veleposlaniku v Sloveniji, gospodu Cavani, ki se je odločil, da se nam danes na današnjem predavanju pridruži. Mr. Ambassador, you are very welcome. Govorili bomo še enkrat o prevodu knjige Ukaz je bil že izvršen. Še enkrat pravim zaradi tega, ker je knjiga bila predstavljena skupaj z drugimi knjigami, ko je izšla. Na ZRC-ju tisti, ki še niste bili na teh hitrih tiskovnih konferencah, predstavimo vse nove publikacije sproti ali pa najkasneje v 4 tednih potem, ko izidejo. Običajno ta predstavitev v atriju ZRC in naslednjič morda se nam tudi vi, študentke in študenti, pridružite, ker vidim tudi nekaj vas tukaj. Torej, gre za drugo predstavitev, ki je prilagojena obisku profesorja Portellija, ki bo, kot nekateri že veste, jutri imel na fakulteti predavanje, tukaj pa bomo še enkrat spregovorili in ta spregovorili pomeni, da se bomo mi trije pogovorili o tem, zakaj, kako in da pa ne bi tega obnavljali v pogovoru, samo dovolite, da še enkrat spomnim. Knjiga je izjemno zgodovinarsko delo in se ukvarja z zelo zanimivim dogodkom, ki se je zgodil marca 1944 v Rimu, ko je italijansko odporniško gibanje napadlo eno od nemških okupacijskih enot. In sosledje mnogih dogodkov, zgodovinarke in zgodovinarji veste, čakali se je na izkrcanje zavezniških sil, te so malo zamujale in potem ta akcija mogoče bila nekoliko preuranjena, kakorkoli že, Nemci so storili to, kar so Nemci vedno delali od leta 1940 naprej, streljali so talce za vsakega ranjenega in ali ubitega vojaka. Ampak zgodba se začne v trenutku, ko te najzgodnejši revizionisti, še pred revizionizmom, začnejo širiti interpretacijo, da je bil objavljen poziv odporniškemu gibanju, naj se storilci predajo, sicer bojo ustrelili talce. Tega Nemci nikoli niso počeli, kot vemo. Vedno so pač ravnali v skladu z ukazom, ki je bil za toliko ljudi, za ranjene, toliko za ubite. Največji zločin, kot veste, je bil na tleh bivše Jugoslavije v Srbiji, ko so za napad partizanskih sil na nemške enote prav tako pobili par tisoč talcev. Torej, in tukaj se začnejo interpretacije prekrivati, nasprotovati in to je to, kar je profesor Portelli odlično naredil s tem, da je delal v arhivih, se pogovarjal z redkimi pričami, z njihovimi sorodniki in seveda naredil en tak generacijski preskok, ker se pogovarjal o tem tudi s svojimi študenti. In tukaj bom, kar se tiče knjige, končal. Ko govorimo o študentih, govorimo o univerzah. Začel je v Sieni kot profesor in predavatelj in potem se v nekem trenutku preselil v Rim na znano La Sapienzo in njegovo področje od vsega začetka je bilo to, kar bi danes rekel ameriške študije, takrat se je rekel predavanje iz ameriške literature. In tu srečamo še enega zelo zanimivega Portellija, ki to ne počne suhoparno, ampak počne tudi na ta način, da se študenti pogovarjajo tudi o glasbeni produkciji. Zelo ga je pritegovala tudi ta protestniška glasba, se pravi Bob Dylan in tako naprej. Srce mu močno bije tudi za Brucea Springsteena, je tako zelo, da je en semester tudi na znani univerziti v Princetonu predaval njem. In to je moje eno prvih vprašanj, ali skupaj z Bruceom ali sam. Torej, gre za nekoga, ki ko se loti neke zadeve, poskuša predstaviti z različnih perspektiv. No in seveda glede na to, kako referenčno je to delo, ni presenečenje, da je bilo vsaj, kar jaz vem, najmanj 2-krat nagrajeno. Prvič z najvišjo nagrado, ki je lahko človek na področju oral history oziroma ustne zgodovine dobi, to je nagrada Mednarodnega združenja za ustno zgodovino. To se je zgodilo pred kakšnimi 22 ali 23 leti in naključje je bilo, da sem na tej konferenci v Portlandu v Oregonu bil na nekem panelu, nek referent tudi jaz, in tam je on, profesor Portellijem, imel tudi otvoritveno predavanje na kongresu. In takrat so seveda tudi, so te, ki so bili pristojni za kongres, tu se zbere, kot veste, kar par sto ljudi, objavili to novico, da bo za tisto leto nagrada šla v njegove roke. Ampak dobil je potem še nagrado Viareggio. To je ena najpomembnejših, po mojem vedenju, italijanskih nagrad, ki so med drugim dobili tudi Elza Morante, Primo Levi, Italo Calvino, Natalija Ginsburg in mnogi drugi. In med njimi tudi profesor Portelli. In še ena najprestižnejših možnih nagrad, ki jih jaz poznam, ki se podeljuje med drugim tudi za ljudi, ki znajo priklicati preteklost. Naslov je v angleščini Retrieving the Past, Historians and Their Sources. In to je nagrada Dana Davida, ki ne bom povedal znesko, ker je astronomska. In če si jo kdo zasluži, si jo je zaslužil profesor Portelli. In med nagrajenci te nagrade so Al Gore, Amos Oz, znani izraelski pisatelj, in seveda znani glasbenik Jojo Ma. Torej, da končam, Mary Marshall Clark, nekdanja predsednica Ameriške zveze za oral history, zdaj pa že nekaj časa direktorica Centra za ustno zgodovino na Columbia University, je, mislim, da je odlično opisala Portellija oziroma njegovo vlogo, in to bom v svoji polomljeni angleščini zdaj prebral v originalu. Takole pravi: Portelli's work has transformed oral history from being a kind of stepchild of history into a literary genre in its own right. He has allowed us to see oral histories as more than eyewitnesses' accounts that are either true or false, and to look for themes and structures of the stories. Torej, mislim, da več takem uvodu ni potrebno povedati. I suggest that we are going to speak about the book through conversation with Professor Portelli. I would give the floor to Marta.
When I thought about this discussion, I thought the last questions, and so I reflected at the book, but also at the second very small book, La Fiera della Falsità, the Fair of Falsehood, and I reflected about a very interesting question linked also with the book and the reception of your book in last decades. And I want ask you which was the reaction after the publication of this book in the environment of the victims, or in the environment of the parents, relatives of the victims, because this is a very close story about the community in Rome, and you interview a lot of the relatives, a lot of parents, and I'm interested which was the reaction by these people who was very close linked with these massacres and with Fosse Ardeatine.
Well, it's hard to tell, because even among the families and the survivors, there are different points of view and different memories. The majority of the families more or less agree with the fact that that you blame the Nazis for what they did, and therefore they somehow identified with the stories as told in the book. You know, one of the things you find out when you do oral history is that the people who are less impressed by the book are the ones that you've interviewed, because what's in the book, well, they already know what's in the book because because it was their story. Others remained unconvinced. You know, there's a small minority that still blames the partisans. Mm-hmm. So, however, the most positive response was from the former partisans. Rosario Bentivegna, who was the person that was mostly blamed for attacking the Germans and then supposedly not turning himself in. He says, especially after the book won an award, he says, we are now vindicated also by culture. You know, the association of the relatives of the victims adopted the book. You know, they promoted it, but somehow what was missing and what the book couldn't give them was a sense of closure. That is, the fact that the story remained and remains unfinished. It's a kind of what moved me to start doing this project and then writing the book. I was not so much interested in setting the record straight on the partisans and the Nazis. By and large, the story is the partisans in Rome attacked a Nazi police unit in the center of Rome. They defeated the Nazis, and the next day the Nazis murdered 335 innocents or prisoners, people rounded up and everything. And they managed to create a narrative which has become common sense. Most people believe it, that the Nazis would not have perpetrated the massacre if the partisans had turned themselves in, which it's a matter of record. It didn't happen. You know, the Nazi commanders themselves said this. No, we didn't do it. However, I was not so much interested in setting the record straight as in trying to understand the pain, the suffering of the families of the survivors. Because in 1996, one of the perpetrators of the Fosse Ardeatine massacre was found in Argentina, extradited into Italy, and put on trial. And the reports of the trial in the news stress how the survivors, the relatives, were crying, fainting, becoming hysterical, just as if it had just happened the day before, not 50 years before. So my question was, how did these people live throughout those 50 years with this open wound? And why did the wound stay open? Mm-hmm. So in the end, the conclusion of the trial was ambiguous, and even if this man ended up under house arrest for the rest of his life. Yet the sense remained that there has been no justice. And the other thing is, this false narrative that blames the partisan is so powerful that it takes more than a book to set the record straight. I mean, I'm not sure how many people have read the book. Maybe 50,000. Maybe 100,000 people have seen a couple of theater performances that were based on the book, very successful. So 150,000 people. 5 minutes on television, prime time, by a very popular, very ignorant MC, had more impact. You know? And this story kept being repeated on television. So the wound is open, the record is not straight, the battle is still on. And for most of the relatives, yes, you know, no matter which side you're on, the pain, the wound is still open. And you know, even in the next generation, because the children grew up surrounded by this pain, this mourning. In some families, it was all over. You know, other families it was worse because there was a silence. Mm-hmm. And I'll just give you one little story and then move on. I have a friend, Estefano, who's a brilliant economic historian, Jewish, anti-fascist, and her father was killed at the Foster di Atene. She had never spoken to her children about it, never. So her children were in therapy, of course. Mm-hmm. And when she knew that I was doing this project, she asked me to interview her as a rehearsal for finally talking to her children. So, you know, in a way, the book was a way for some people to come out of silence, to break silence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
May I jump in? How long was this idea with you before?
I mean, 5 minutes. No, I'll tell you how it happened. Okay, I had done this book on Terni, which was, you know, the first major oral history. And then, since I was living in Rome, I thought I should do a book on the oral history of Rome. And then I thought, how do you do an oral history of Rome? It's 3 million people. You can't interview Julius Caesar. And so I didn't. And then one day, when the trial on the Foster di Atene was on, there was there's another Nazi massacre in Rome at La Storta, which is just across the street from where I live. And there's a little stone commemorating the 14 people that were killed on that spot. One morning I got up, went out for buying a paper, shopping, and there was a huge swastika on that stone. 5 minutes later, the whole neighborhood, not the whole neighborhood, because mine is a basically right-wing, conservative, middle-class neighborhood, but it used to be working class. So the people from the older families, from the local shops and everything, the artisans, they were all gathered around that stone, trying to discuss how to erase that stone, that swastika. And one talked about, they all had different means. And I asked myself, okay, what do I have to erase the swastika? And I had just had the opportunity of meeting with one of the heroes of the resistance in Rome who had been involved in this attack in Via Rasella. And I thought, well, I don't know how to erase a swastika from a stone, but I can do my best to erase the swastika that we all have in our minds. And the means that I have to erase the swastika from our minds is oral history. So I had already interviewed this partisan, and he sent me on to one of the relatives, and then it just moved on. And the interesting thing was, I talked to friends and colleagues about this project that I was thinking of doing it, and everybody said, okay, but where do you start? Do you start with the partisans' action? Do you start with the beginning of the war? You should start in 1938, the anti-Jewish racist laws of the Italian fascist government. And then I suddenly realized, here I'm doing the oral history of Rome. That moment, because it's a moment where, all the stories of the people of Rome somehow converge. Because if you look at the list of victims, every neighborhood, every trade, every generation, every political, it's a cross-section of the people of a big city. The Fosse Ardeatine is the only Nazi massacre in a major metropolitan city. Mm-hmm. So you have, you have Jews, Catholics, atheists, which nobody ever counts, and so everything is sort of funneled into this moment, the whole history of Rome. People who migrated from the south, people who came in from the north, people who were born there. And then from there, all the stories spread out, what happened afterwards. So in a way, this was a way of doing this project, of doing a history of the city of Rome through that particular moment, through the histories of the people who were killed and the histories of the people who survived.
Well, speaking of how much impact one can have, competing with television, for example, that you mentioned, I do still remember before you gave a talk in Portland, Oregon. That was the conference. They announced that the prize is going to. Yeah. So you started with the story of your spouse.
Yes.
And now connecting with this interpretation that is still very much embedded in yeah.
Okay.
Why so? I mean,
yes. My wife hates me because I keep telling this story all over the world. Anyway, what happens? I write this book. The book is shortlisted for the Viareggio Book Prize, which I never thought I would ever be involved in. And I get a phone call the day the prize is to be announced. And they said, stand by the phone because we're going to announce the winner, which is an unofficial way of telling you you won. So what does the wife of the winner of the Viareggio Book Prize do? She goes to the hairdressers because we were going to be on television that night. So she goes to the hairdressers. While she's there, I get the official phone call. So I call her and said, yes, and she's pleased, visibly pleased. So the man says, madam, what happened? Good news? And she said, yeah, my husband did this book. We did a book. We got an award. And what is the book about? The Fosse Ardeatine. The lady next to her, these cowardly communist partisans, they caused all these innocents to be killed, and they didn't turn themselves in. And my wife says, my husband just wrote this big book showing that it didn't happen that way. And she says, if he had talked to me, he would not have written that book. Which means, it's a myth. And a myth is a story that you need to believe. You need to believe in that myth. And it's absolutely proof safe. There's no way you can undermine it. And in a way, this has continued because, well, ever since we've had anti-fascist governments, Berlusconi and now Meloni. Meloni is a direct heir of the allies of the Nazis. They had serious problems dealing with this narrative. Incidentally, doing the project, I discovered that right-wing people know a lot more about the story than most left-wing people, because they know the wrong things, but they all feel this, because they're obsessed by it, because they need to exercise this narrative. So what you have is that from the government you keep having stories, versions that try not to deal with what actually happened. So 2 years ago, our president, our prime minister, Giorgia Meloni, said these people were killed only because they were Italians. Well, number one, if they just wanted to kill Italians, they didn't have to go to all that trouble. Rome was full of Italians. Mm-hmm. Number two, they were not all Italians. One of the stories that moved me was the story of a man named Leon Blumstein. Leon Blumstein had been born in what is now Lviv, Ukraine. And he had come to Italy because he thought it was safer. And he was killed at Fosse Ardeatine. Number two, after October 7th, October 8th, the occupation and everything, the king moved south, and Mussolini established this northern republic, of which Ljubljana was supposed to be a province of the Italian Social Republic. And in the charter of the Repubblica Sociale Italiana, Article 7, it says, Jews are not Italians. So they killed 72 Jews at the Fosse Ardeatine. They didn't kill them because they were Italians. They killed them because they were not Italians. Number three, Italians cooperated in the massacre. The interior minister of Mussolini's government delivered to the Nazis a list of 50 Italians to be added to the list of the Todkandidaten. So fortunately, this is why this book came out, as a response to this. And so last year, she made a little step forward. She said it was the Nazis. It was a Nazi massacre. She hasn't mentioned fascists yet, but perhaps, if we keep pushing. So I don't remember what the question was. And okay. It's about the myth. It's about how there is no way. My mind is made up. Don't bother me with facts. They say in the States. So because believing in blaming the partisans, that is therefore blaming the communists, means absolving the fascists and absolving the Nazis. And it also means that because we have a constitution that was based on the experience of the liberation from fascism, it means that if you prove that the liberation movement was criminal and irresponsible, you undermine the anti-fascist substance of the Italian constitution, which means exactly you can have fascists in the government. And so this is, it's one of the, it's just one episode. It's not even the worst Nazi massacre in Italy. There have been worse. Incidentally, there have been worse Italian massacres here and in Croatia, and that we haven't that we've never dealt with. We never delivered our war criminals. That's another story. But it's so powerful symbolically. So powerful symbolically because of the meaning of Rome, because of the false narrative that has been created, which is ultimately a symbolic narrative on the nature of the Italian democracy, which I didn't realize before I started doing this.
I could continue here. When you mention the Italian silence about the fascist massacres and so on. But in this book, you mention with the historian, German historian Lutz Klinkhammer, also the relationship, the German relationships with these Italian massacres, and in which way the German authorities, especially the diplomacy, German diplomacy in Italy, obstacled the trial and the justice. No, you could explain better this, because when we discussed about the Second World War, we have a very most of the people have a very positive idea about the Germany and the past, or about the Germany and Nazi crimes in the Second World War, and this negative idea about the Italian and the fascist crimes. The story about the Fosse Altogliatine explained that this framework and this also the German approach is more ambiguous.
Well, number one, my colleague Lutz Klinkhammer, who's the director of the German Institute in Rome, and he's a brilliant historian of the Nazi occupation, of the German occupation of Italy. And he pointed out how in German public memory, this episode is almost non-existent compared to everything else that they did. This is a minor thing. This is a minor thing. So it's not. There is at least one book by another German historian that somehow repeats the same narratives as the Italian conservative historians, but not very. The German authorities, actually what they did was to resist the victims, not just the victims of the Fosse Altogliatine, the victims of the Shoah, the survivors and their relatives, for compensation. And the German government claimed that they were not the same state as the Nazis, so they were not responsible, and the Italian bureaucracy also made it so very difficult for survivors of the Shoah to get their compensation. But basically, in the end, the only thing that the German government did was to finance a project to do an online atlas of Nazi and fascist massacres in Italy, which is very, very useful for historians and for media and everything, but no compensation to the families. The other thing is, we Italians have a stereotype for the Germans. We imagine that the Germans are mechanical beings, you know. I mean, I remember the ways in which our sports papers describes German football, you know, the machine, and so they. This is very important. One of the reasons why this tragedy happens. You've got to blame somebody, but in order to blame somebody, it has to be somebody with a human person with consciousness. Our stereotype is that the Germans are not really human. They're either machines. They react automatically. So one of the points that I try to make in the book, which I think is important, and which we make again with Lutz, is as opposed to what we read in our school books. Because, I mean, even my colleagues in my faculty have written very good textbooks for schools in which they say every partisan action was followed by a Nazi massacre. No, there were partisan actions that were not followed by massacres, and there were massacres in places where there never was a partisan. So, because it was not automatic, it was not a machine, it was a political decision. It was a political decision. This thing has happened, what do we do? And there was a debate between German authorities, including initially Hitler himself, as to what are we going to do. So it was not automatic. But our myth is, it's a machine. You touch a button and it goes. Or, as in a number of interviews, they're ferocious. They're animals. They're wild animals. It's like a lion. You bother a lion and he will bite you. So the Italian stereotype of dehumanizing the Nazis absolves them from guilt. How do you blame? My favorite passage in Herman Melville's Moby Dick is when Starbucks asks Ahab, how do you blame a whale for what they've done? So how do you blame a lion for biting you? How do you blame a Nazi for killing you? They're not human. Who is human here? The partisans. And so the story in which you blame the partisans of Fosse Ardeatine is repeated all over Italy, because you always blame the next person, the person who's more like you. And also because there's no, all these stories are told as local narratives. Civitella Valdichiana, 156 men killed after the partisans killed 3 Nazi soldiers. Pietronseri, Leonessa, all over. They're always told in terms of local narratives and what the local partisans did to provoke the Nazis, not as a general strategy, which was a general strategy, which was a strategy of, one always has Gaza in mind these days, of clearing up the land in order to, because the population was not, population didn't like the Nazis, they didn't cooperate. So you clean up the land to make it easier for the military operations to be carried out. And this was a strategy that begins in Sicily and ends in Bolzano, all over. But all the narratives you have are local narratives. Oh, if this particular partisan had not attacked that particular Nazi, this would not have happened. So one other thing that I tried to do was to point out that this was a general strategy, that the decision of the massacre was not a legal decision, like they immediately, both the Nazis and the Catholic Church immediately described the partisan action as a crime. So if there's a crime, there has to be a punishment. And if the victims are not found, you use the threat of retaliation as moral pressure. You say, if you don't turn yourself in, we will kill all these people. They don't do it, and the Germans, true to their words, they've said it, they got to do it. So this is the kind of narrative you have, that a crime has been committed. It's the editorial of the Osservatore Romano, which I found amazing, because it says, 32 victims, the victims are the Germans, and 322 persons sacrificed for the guilty, who have escaped arrest. So you have a crime with victims, perpetrators, and a sacrifice in the middle. And, the word sacrifice told by the official organ of the Catholic Church, a church that is built on the sacrifice of Christ. It means making sacred. It's as if the massacre of the Fosserdettini was some kind of liturgy. And I find that terrible. But, so, see what I mean? The point is to shift the moral, in order to shift the blame, the moral blame, you have to dehumanize the Nazis. And also to ignore the overall strategy, ignore the military purpose. The reason that the massacre was done they did not even bother to look for the partisans. The immediate order from Hitler all the way down the hierarchy was, how do we retaliate? Because the point was, this was a terrorist action. That is, it was done in order to terrorize the city so that they wouldn't do it again. Because as Lutzkenhammer points out, which I had never thought, the forces that the Nazis had to control the city of Rome was very limited. They didn't have, all the troops were at the front, and they didn't. So the only way they could keep a town of 1 million people quiet was to terrorize it, to make it, to convince the people that they were invulnerable and invincible. So what happens? What happens is that the partisans attack, and they're not invulnerable, they're not invincible. So it's a breach in their defense. So you have to prove that to the city that if you touch us, you pay a price. So this was a military action, not a judicial action. But if you don't have that perspective of the strategy, of the overall military vision of a war against civilians, then you keep looking for local causes and blaming your neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. So the way how they did it and why they did it is one of these many strong points of this book. Because there was their decision. It was not automatically, as you said. But before making the usual mistake, opening the floor when the time is already over, I'm going to open the floor now, and then if there are some questions, now since we are over the middle already, but still.
I talk too much.
No. This is why you're here. Izvoli.
I would like to ask you, maybe you deepen more the role of the Roman Catholic Church on making the period of fascism and the role of the Italian fascism. As far as I recall, there was in the beginning from the Berlin, directly from Hitler, also he wanted to be 12,000 people from Rome and to bomb, to make explosions in the centrum of Rome.
Well, yeah. Okay, there's that thing. This is a story for which there is no actual documents. It's a story that General Kesselring told. My colleague Lutzkenhammer says it may or may not be true. But the initial order from Hitler was deport 10,000 people and blew up the center of Rome. And the local commanders said two things. One, well, Rome, we sort of like Rome. It's a pity to destroy it. Number two, in order to deport 10,000 people, we had to take troops out of the front, and we can't do that. how to combat. So it's impossible. So, which goes to prove one thing that is very important, that it is not true that you could not discuss Hitler's orders. See? And so they finally pared it down to 10-1, which I think is interesting because 10-1, this is probably the only place in which the ratio was 10-1. But the part of the myth is that there was a law, 10 Italians for a German. In the case of Civitella Valdichiana, there are interviews in which people say, didn't the partisans know that there was a law of 10 Italians for each German? And no, my colleagues that did that project did not think of asking the person, so how much is 156 divided by 3? It's not. Yeah. It never existed. So anyway, so this is, and in the end, General Kessler claimed that Italians ought to build him a monument because he pared down the number of the victims and he saved a lot of Italian lives. So that was one thing. As for the Catholic Church, number one, I grew up believing in the false narrative because it was being repeated on the pulpit in every church in Italy in 1948 under the elections. And it became, and the church kept, and what was called the Democrazia Cristiana kept repeating it because it was part of the Cold War narrative. In the Cold War narrative, of course, the communists are criminal, the communists are, and so on. On the other hand, the church had, the church had not recognized the Italian state in 1870 because the Italian state put an end to the Pope's worldly domain, to the Pope's estate, and invaded Rome, and so the church only recognized the Italian state in 1929 when they made an agreement with Mussolini, so that Mussolini became the person that had finally pacified. Sometimes pacifiers are the worst. And so there's a famous statement that the Pope Pius X, I think, made, that Providence has sent us this man, Mussolini. 1938, Italy passes anti-Jewish laws. What is the reaction of the church? Please exempt from the discrimination all the Jews who have converted to Catholicism or married Catholics. That is, exempt ours. Forget about the others. Throughout the war, the Pope never said a word, directly at least, about the Shoah, even though at least 4,000 Jews in Rome, half of the Rome Jewish population, were saved by hiding in convents, churches, and so on. I mean, with the Pope's permission. So it was very ambivalent. In the case of the Fosse Ardeatine, documents have come out that prove that somebody informed the Vatican before the massacre began, and the Vatican didn't do anything. So partly, I guess, what was primary in the mind of the Pope was to save not himself necessarily, but the church as an institution. So saving the church as an institution meant mediating, coming to terms with Nazis. Incidentally, the Catholic Church after the war, excommunicated communists, but it never excommunicated Nazis. So, and Pope Pius XII, well, he was steeped in German culture, and somehow there was a different relationship with Germany. But it was very ambivalent. One thing, I decided that I would not go into this in the book. It's a whole other story. There's there's a movie by Costa Gavras in which he tries to somehow deal with this, but it's a completely made up. Yes.
Thank you, Professor. As you probably know, what you are telling us today and what's in the book is highly relevant for our country. The country that during the Second World War had less than 2 million people and more than 100,000 casualties, many of them exactly killed in retaliation actions all over this country. Of course,
there's a book by Carlo Ginzburg, and it's about another story. And he says something about how the task of the tribunal, of the courts, is to close the case. The task of the historians is to keep it open. And I think I don't think that closure was the purpose of my book, and it never is the purpose of the work of history. You know? On the other hand, there was a moment, again, when we had neo-fascists in the regional government of Lazio, and they launched a campaign against biased history books, meaning that they were biased basically against the fascists. Well, one point that they made, which was taken, was that there was mention of the Fosse Ardeatine. Hardly any of those books mentioned the Foibe, the massacres of the perpetrated by units of the Yugoslav resistance on the Italian Eastern border, which is another myth, because the numbers are exaggerated, because again the narrative is they just killed them because they were Italians, which is another myth, but still. So yes, and the point was a whole campaign against this idea of divided memory, meaning we ought to have the same memory, and I think this is horrible. I mean, in a democracy, it is very important that we have divided memories, because of you can only a unified memory is exactly what President Trump is trying to impose today on in the United States. You know, you can no longer have narratives that criticize the country for the role in slavery. No, we need to have a unified. So it's only authoritarian regimes that have unified narrative. In democracy, democracy is a machine in which you can have fight fight between different memories and world visions without killing one another, basically. So in a democracy, we need to have a number of. Some of these narratives are false. Some of these then we use all the means of historical research, to prove that they're false. But it's part of democratic debate, not part of suppressing dissenting memories. I mean, as long as when we now, a member of our government, a minister of the Italian Republic, just said that these field trips to Auschwitz were just intended when students. they're just made so that people can blame fascism. Now, number one, it's not true. I've been there a number of times. But number two, I thought it was the task of a democratic republic to educate children against fascism. And now it's turned over, you know. If you still, what do you do? Do you jail her or does she jail us? No. It's a battle of ideas. It's a battle of ideas. It's a political struggle. And I guess, as I said, the fact that the memory of the not of the Fosse Ardeatine, but of Via Rasella, of the partisan attack, is so crucial to right-wing memory in Italy. Means that they need to exercise the Fosse Ardeatine. In fact, one of the ways in which there's a story that a lady tells in the book, where she says, you know, she was a widow, of course, and people at work would ask her what happened, and she said, yeah, my husband's been killed at Fosse Ardeatine. And people immediately reacted by shifting the gaze from the Fosse Ardeatine to Via Rasella, from the massacre to the partisans. Oh, you blame the partisans. It was their, you know, the massacre at the Fosse Ardeatine is almost uncountenanceable. You know, you can't deal with it. Because one of the reasons why it's so hard to deal with it, it's so civilized. It's so civilized. This was not, you know, one of the, you take, you know, a number of actions in Italy, in Kosovo, and you know, an army unit goes berserk and they kill everything in sight. What happened at the Fosse Ardeatine was, number one, finally there's all this discussion, how many are we going to kill? They get to how many are going to kill, the man goes to the office, that's exactly what my father did. My father was a bureaucrat, and he would go to the archive, get folders and draw lists of people who were entitled to receive support from the government. In this case, he goes to the archive, gets the folders, makes a list of people that are going to be killed. Then what do? They have trucks, and they load people on trucks, and they check their names on the list, and they take them to a place that's been. So it's very orderly. It's very civilized. It's like the Shoah. The savages could not do Auschwitz. It's only us, Western civilization, that could do this. So this is another thing why it's so hard to look in the face, that massacre. Because it's us, it's not them. It's not the Nazi beast. It's Western civilization. Yeah? So, and this is why, you know, you shift the gaze and you talk about the action in Via Rasella. All the reviews of the book that came out said it's a book about Via Rasella. No, it's not. It's a book about the Fosse Ardeatine.
If I just a second, I would like to connect with explanation why that this was the second reason why we decided for the translation of the book, because the case described, it can stand for the Slovenian case as well. You know, this misinterpretation of what was going on, that becomes a myth. Izvoli.
No, it's. I actually have a question about justice that often goes unanswered, as we know. And the question would be: did you ever get to meet Mr. Pripke? Because I'm asking you as a Roman, and he's been seen around Villa Borghese walking while in house arrest. So I was just going to ask you, how did it feel?
No, I never did. Well, I did a fascinating interview with Gianfranco Fini, who was at that time the secretary of the ex-neo-fascist party. And he gave me Priebke's lawyer's number, and I called him. And the man said, yes, I'll call you back and set a date. And they never did. And one of the reasons why they didn't was that they would, after the first few things that this guy Priebke said in public, they were so horrible that his handlers, his lawyers, prevented anyone from talking to him who was not already on his side. One of the worst examples was, of course, the so-called great journalist Indro Montanelli, who wrote articles saying, after all, he was a soldier. Incidentally, he was not a soldier. You know, that's another story. The SS were not soldiers. They were party militia. And the fact that they were tried by the Italian military court was a huge mistake, because they were not soldiers, you know. But you know, there are so many, and there are so many things that I didn't know when I started doing this.
More questions? If not, I would wrap up with the actual situation. You started, I mean, mentioning Trump. When we see the situation as it is in US right now, meaning in the last decade almost, one thing comes to mind. It's Antonius Gramsci's famous sayings, no, the old is dying out, but the new is not here yet. So do you believe we are living in that particular period? Although we historians know now that there are many things happen in the past that might be more horrible as the present moment, but how do you feel? The question is related with your work for the newspaper Il Manifesto, where in some of these comments you would be interested in what's going on in the US and trying to explain to the Italian audience. So how do you feel being, as we know, attached to US in different ways? How do you feel about this present moment? And I know there is no short version of the answer, but
and
still.
One of my dearest friends and one of the persons that represented everything that we love in that country just passed away the other day, and I had a feeling that my response was, it's a crueler world. Because, well, what's happening is, number one, can I tell you a little story?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because many years ago, I was assisting a group of American students who had been selected to spend a semester in Italy, and they were, we were coming over on the boat, and and during the trip, I was supposed to tell her a few things about, Now these were selected students, number one, and so I explained to them that the United States was a presidential republic, Italy was a parliamentary republic, and what was the difference? And then the day before we landed, I gave them a little test. And the most intelligent among them, one of the questions was, what is the difference between the US and the Italian system of government? And the most intelligent of them said, Italy is a parliamentary republic. The United States is a democracy. Meaning she didn't know what the word democracy means. This was in the middle of the war for democracy in Vietnam. So I think one of the things that have happened is that the meaning of the word democracy has been lost. And democracy simply means the status quo in the United States. The white supremacy, basically, and power politics. The people who stormed the Capitol 4 years ago, well, they claimed that they were there to defend democracy, or what they thought democracy was, because democracy is being threatened by black people, by women, by immigrants. You know, democracy is, well, just like Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. It's the only democracy for people of the right descent and the right, you know, they're So democracy does not necessarily mean you act democratically toward the other. Democracy means fair play in a limited circle. And in that case, democracy means white supremacy, basically. And I think Trump has no idea what democracy is. And he banks on the shared ignorance. That's one thing. The other thing that terrifies me is, okay, after the Nazis did the massacre in the Fosse Ardeatine, they tried to hide it. That is, on the one hand, because, you know, knowing that it had happened, but not seeing it increased the terror. But also because they were afraid that if people saw it, people would be enraged. So they covered that. They tried to cover it up. So the Nazis, no matter how horrible were the things that they did not boast about them. They tried to hide them. They covered up Sobibor. You know? So what's happening today in the United States, in the Middle East, is that people are proud of the pain that they inflict. I'm thinking of the image of the Minister for Homeland Security in front of the crowded jail in Salvador, proud of the fact that she's locked up. So it's that is really something that had not happened before. And yes, the restoring of capitalistic and white power. The other thing is the United States is the most unequal country in the West. Next is Britain, and next is us. But in terms of the distribution of wealth, but resentment is not aimed at the rich, because the myth is I might become rich, or they deserve it. Resentment is directed toward the cultural elites. That is this whole campaign about. So the other day I was watching another painful loss. Diane Keaton left us. And so they showed Annie Hall on television. And I was looking at Annie Hall, and I thought, this is exactly what Trump voters have in mind. Think about it. The United States are only New York and California. The rest is flyover country. So there, you have all these images of the plane. So and then, of course, all these liberal New York elites with their complicated problems, all the liberal and Jewish, because of course you cannot be racist without being anti-Semitic. So even though they keep talking about protecting us against anti-Semitism, once you allow people to say that the Muslims are beasts, automatically next day you will talk about Jews as enemies of mankind. So the legitimation of so you have these educated New York liberals with their psychological problems, working show business, and moving between New York and California and growing. From the point of view of a Trump voter, this is exactly what they have in mind. Essentially, if I were to take a movie on a deserted island with me, I would take Annie Hall. It's my favorite movie ever. But from that point of view, it tells you what's happening. They're imagining this world and reading it against the grain. So basically, the total totalitarian power of the money elite is being covered up by directing the resentment toward the cultural elites. And the cultural elites are not doing much to, we're making movies like Annie Hall. So.
Oh, thank you very much for the idea to organize the show of Annie Hall for our graduate students in the near future and discuss that particular feeling and the situation that it represents, and then trying to speak of the truth and
because of
interpretation.
Course, the typical Trump voter does not understand the humor.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing.
If there are any other questions?
Just a small one. You were talking about closure. Every academic, I'm a journalist. My question comes out of a conversation with Hassan Luthanovic, who was the translator for the Dutch battalion in Srebrenica, the UN battalion. He wrote a book about Srebrenica, and in the book he complains that his Australian professor, when he was writing the PhD, was pressuring him to write about closure. And he was trying to tell him there is no word in Bosnian language or in any Slavic languages with the same meaning. We don't know what closure is, therefore
we don't know in
have
Italian
word.
either.
And I'm wondering whether you have it in Italian.
No, we don't have it in Italian. And you reminded me of an interview I did many years ago with a man named Joe Bartel. Joe Bartel was a Marxist-Leninist private investigator in San Francisco, just out of Dashiell Hammett. And he was investigating death sentence causes. And he talked about how the families of the victims expected that the killing of the perpetrator would give them closure, and they didn't, and they never did, because of course, okay, that man is dead, but your loved one is not back. So there's no such thing as closure, and it's one of those words that polite language just created, but to tell us no. There's one of the things that I realized doing oral history is not only no story has a beginning, but no story has an end. No story has an end. And so we don't have the word closure in Italian either. conclusione, chiusura. No.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Professor
you.
Portellijem,
Thank you.
for being with us.
Grazie. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador.
And thank you for doing
being with
this.
us.
I'm really, thank you for the translation.
Thank you.